Elkara had always glowed too brightly. From the moment its stone towers were raised upon the cliffs of the southern reaches, the kingdom shone like a shard of glass set against the wild tangle of the world. Its banners were white, trimmed in pale gold. Its temples reflected the sun so fiercely that pilgrims would approach them squinting, half-blind. The palace itself was crowned with crystal spires designed to catch light from every angle, sending shards of radiance down into the courtyards and tiled halls like blessings made visible. Everything, every statue, every street, every scroll, was soaked in the rhetoric of clarity, brilliance, and purity. Light was worshipped. Darkness was punished. But the brightest light cast the longest shadow. Beneath Elkara's sun-drenched capital, beyond the marble roads and polished fountains, stretched a world that no map dared name. A vast network of ancient tunnels and yawning caverns lay beneath the city's foundations, older than the kingdom by millennia. They ran deep and wide, carving through the earth like veins, twisting, echoing, shifting with time and tremors. No one knew how far they reached. No one dared to find out. They were simply called the Hollow. Once, perhaps, in the fog-cloaked centuries before Elkara's founding, those caverns had been home to something. Not quite people, not quite beasts, stories varied. The oldest tales told of beings made of echo and stone, of rituals that fed on silence, of songs that bent shadow into form. Some said the Hollow had been sacred. Others said it was cursed. Either way, the verdict had long since been rendered. The Hollow was sealed. Its mouths bricked shut, its name struck from the records, its symbols burned from the stones. Temples were built atop its entrances, heavy with incense and sun-gleaming altar mirrors, to weigh the ground down with sanctity. Soldiers were stationed to patrol the borders of those forbidden grounds, their spears gilded but their faces tense. Anyone who stepped too near the old cave mouse was warned once. Twice. On the third time they were simply not seen again. There was a law, quiet, unwritten, but observed with unshakable precision. Those cast into the Hollow never return. There was no trial. No stone to mark the condemned. They were led through a gate under the cover of night, and the gate was closed behind them. That was all. And the people obeyed. It was easy to obey in the light. Easy to smile and bow and never ask what lay beneath the shimmering streets. Easier still to believe what the priest said, that darkness was an infection, and the Hollow its oldest wound. King Thane was the embodiment of this belief. Tall, sun-haired, his skin bronzed by the light of 100 parades, he ruled with the easy cruelty of a man who believed his reflection was divine. His face adorned every banner, every coin, every entranceway. And beside him stood Queen Isrel, pale and sharp and brilliant in her white silks, her eyes the color of frost-reflecting flame. If Thane was the sun, she was its blade. It was said that her ancestors once lit entire fields ablaze to cleanse them of unclean spirits, and she had never strayed far from their methods. Together, they cultivated a court obsessed with ritual cleanliness and radiant displays of control. The courtiers wore silk dyed only in pastel tones, forbidden from ever donning black. Servants were made to wash their hands with sacred salt every hour. Anyone caught weeping in public was given a flower-shaped mask to wear until they could regain their grace. Light was everywhere, in windows, in jewelry, and in forced smiles. The punishment for spreading shadow thinking was exile. The punishment for harboring it was worse. No one mentioned the Hollow. Not out loud. But they all feared it. And so the kingdom continued, its fountains singing, its flags billowing like prayers, its people bright and silent. Until the black moon rose. It was an old omen thought to be dead with the old world. A full moon gone completely dark, not hidden by clouds, not merely waning but black as ink and wrong in its presence. It rose without warning one spring night, casting the kingdom into a darkness so complete that not even the temple torches could hold their flames. Fires sputtered. Lanterns failed. And in the high tower of a noble house near the city's edge, a child was born screaming. The midwives would not speak her name. They delivered her in silence, their hands shaking, their eyes wide as they tried to swaddle her in white linen that the child kept kicking free. The moment she drew breath, the torches in the birthing room dimmed to a sickly flicker. The shadows lengthened, then moved. One darted up the wall like a bird, another curled beneath the crib like a breath waiting to be taken. One of the maids fainted. The nurse clutched her prayer thread and whispered the sun hymn through bloodless lips. But the child, she screamed louder than any they had ever heard. Not with pain. Not with fear. But with something else. Something vast and old and echoing. The walls trembled. She was born hollow-marked, one whispered. And though no one had spoken of it in decades, they all understood. She was taken from the room before dawn. Her mother, Lady Avail, refused to speak of her. Her father vanished 3 days later in what was officially called an accident involving a horse. The household was placed under quiet supervision by the crown. And the girl, unnamed and unspoken, was raised behind shuttered windows, taught by mute handmaidens and fed by those who never looked her in the eye. The only thing she kept from her birth was a mark. A black crescent, curling beneath her collarbone, as if the moon had kissed her skin and left a part of itself behind. The court never saw her. The public never knew of her. And yet rumors rippled. They said she walked without making sound. That mirrors cracked when she stood too near. That the air around her grew colder when she was upset. Some whispered that the rats in the walls followed her like shadows. Others claimed her eyes had no color, only the shimmer of far-off stars. It wasn't until her 8th year that the court finally took notice. She had wandered from the estate one morning, how she slipped past the guards was never explained, and entered the sacred chapel during prayer. The temple doors burst open of their own accord. Light dimmed. And when the high priestess turned to scold the intruder, she dropped to her knees instead, mouth open in silent horror. All 7 altar mirrors had cracked, each one split straight down the center from top to base as the child stood at the threshold. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply stood there barefooted and breathing, eyes wide. The queen was told at once. By nightfall, a quiet carriage arrived at the estate. The girl was taken without resistance, her eyes still glowing faintly in the lamplight. She was clothed in white, but it quickly grayed as the road took her away from the city's clean stone into the overgrown outskirts. No one said goodbye. The carriage stopped near a ruined temple, long since abandoned, its steps broken and its walls covered in vines. Beneath it, hidden by the weeds, was a round stone door, half buried, half braced shut by iron and old seals. It took 7 men to open it. They lit no torches. They did not speak. They carried her to the edge of the hollow's mouth, looked away and let her fall. The stone door closed again. The law held. The girl was gone. The queen returned to her tower, her hands scrubbed raw. The king drank 3 glasses of star wine and laughed too loudly at nothing in particular. The court resumed its rituals. And though no one said it, they all felt a tremor in the earth that night, like a deep and ancient breath being drawn. Remembered. Lyra was not supposed to be remembered. She was born to a lesser branch of the House of Vane, a family whose name carried enough weight to open court doors but never to keep them open. They lived on the edge of Elcara's capital, far from the glinting heart of power, in a manor half sunk into ivy and forgetfulness. Her father, Lord Theron, attended court once a season, bowed too often and returned with nothing. Her mother, Lady Avail, was pale and silent, her beauty cold as silver gone untouched. And then came Lyra. Her birth was strange. She did not cry for hours after emerging, only blinked at the moonlight streaming in through the shutters. The midwife, a woman who had served in dozens of noble births, went still as she wiped the blood from the infant's chest. She called for another cloth, then another. Then she simply stopped. Her fingers hovered just above Lyra's left collarbone, where the skin was not smooth but inked. It was not a bruise. Not a smudge. It was a mark, perfect, clean, black as obsidian. A crescent moon, the curve of it so sharp it seemed to shimmer, though the child's skin was warm and soft. The midwife dropped the cloth. "Shadow marked," she whispered, then made a sun sign with trembling fingers and left without waiting to be paid. Lyra's mother ordered the drapes pulled tight. She told the servants not to speak of the child beyond the manor walls. She forbade her husband from writing to the court. And so Lyra remained, cloistered and unnamed to the outside world, growing like a secret between stones. The other children in the estate would not play with her. They ran if she came near, even when she said nothing. One boy swore her eyes reflected things that hadn't happened yet. A girl claimed that Lyra's shadow once turned and moved the wrong way, even as Lyra herself stood still. The animals were no better. The stable dogs barked until they choked. The horses refused to let her near. Once, the family's old gray cat leapt from a windowsill and ran into the night, never to be seen again, just because Lyra had looked at it too long. She learned not to try. Instead, she wandered the dim halls of her home alone, often barefoot, often silent. She grew thin and pale and careful. Her voice was soft but steady. Her eyes were strange, gray one day, violet the next, always rimmed with long lashes too dark for her hair. Her crescent mark never faded. Her mother tried covering it with powder once, but it returned, slicking through the makeup like oil through water. By the time she was 7, Lyra no longer asked questions aloud. She asked them inwardly, downwardly. into the dark corners of the hallways, the cracks in the floor, the places that always seemed colder when she passed by. And something in those shadows, listened. That was when the dreams began. She would wake in the middle of the night with dirt on her feet, the scent of moss in her hair. Once, she woke up clutching a feather that shimmered like glass but crumbled in daylight. Another time, she had a smear of ash on her lips, though the hearths were cold. She began to see things at dusk, figures flickering just beyond the edge of vision. Sometimes she could understand what they whispered, though the language made her head ache, old words winding and thick as roots. She never told anyone. But the Hollow was watching. The worst of it came in her 8th year. She had accompanied her mother to the capital for the Feast of Illumination, a holy day during which noble houses were permitted to enter the royal chapel and offer brief blessings at the mirrored altar. It was the first time Lyra had ever stepped foot into the city's inner heart. The marble streets were too bright, the faces too polished. She flinched from the light, and her mother scolded her for squinting. The chapel was massive, white as bone, hung with suncloths and vines of gold thread. At its center stood the great altar, ringed by 7 tall mirrors, each one faced inward, so that they reflected one another endlessly, light bouncing from glass to glass in a spiral of radiance. Nobles entered one by one, bowed and left. Lyra followed her mother up the steps, trembling. She didn't mean for it to happen. She stepped past the 7th mirror and the light recoiled. Something unseen buckled in the air. The reflections rippled. And then, one by one, the mirrors cracked, hairline fractures snaking through them like frost. All 7. The entire chamber froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the queen's high priestess gasped. She pointed. Shadowborn, she hissed. Lyra was pulled away before her mother could even deny it. That night, she was taken from the manor in silence. No carriage wheels. No torches. Just black-clad royal stewards, their mouths thin, their eyes hollow. She was blindfolded with silk soaked in lavender. Her hands were bound in white thread. Her shoes were taken. She did not cry. She was led far, far beyond the city, to a place where the wind howled through dead trees and the ground felt strange beneath her feet, soft and waiting. The silk was removed. She saw nothing, only a yawning, breathless black, deeper than night. The Hollow. Its breath rose cool against her cheeks as if it already knew her. She turned once, looked back. No one met her eyes. Then they pushed. She fell into the dark and it swallowed her. They called it a mercy. The decree came from the royal court 2 days after Lyra vanished into the Hollow. Penned in gold-leaf script and sealed with the sun crest of Elkara, it was read aloud in every province, every square, every market street. It was spoken without tremor, as though it were fact, not fate. For the safety of the realm, the decree read, the girl born under blight, marked by shadow, has been granted peace in death. Let no record preserve her. Let no prayer call her name. And just like that, Lyra was erased. She had no tomb, no last rites. No mourners followed her. Her name was struck from the family register by decree of the royal archivists, her birth never to be referenced again. The House of Vane, already fading from favor, was suddenly absent from court. Some whispered they had been sent away to the mountains. Others said they left of their own accord, too ashamed to remain. But a few knew the truth, or something close to it. Their estate burned less than a fortnight after the proclamation. The fire began in the east wing, spreading fast, too fast, the servants said, as though it had been waiting in the walls. The flames danced in a strange rhythm, curling like fingers, like smiles. The manor collapsed before dawn, and the family within was declared lost. There was no inquiry. No search. The royal court held a feast the next day to celebrate the summer crown. The king toasted with honeyed wine. The queen wore a dress spun with solar threads. The court moved on. And Elkara forgot. As the years slipped by, the world polished itself clean of her. Songs that once mentioned a strange child of Vane were rewritten. House records quietly lost her name. Tutors instructed students not to ask about the Black Moon year. Priests offered blessings only to those born beneath the 7 stars, never the void between. Even children, once curious, began to shrug when asked if they remembered the girl who had cracked the chapel mirrors. No, they said. There was no such girl. Time did what it always does in kingdoms that fear dark things. It buried her. But beneath the kingdom, time flowed differently. The Hollow did not forget. Its depths were endless, a labyrinth of stone and silence. Those who had studied it in ancient days claimed the cave stretched so far that they looped back on themselves. That if one walked long enough, they would return to the place they began, though the stars overhead would be unfamiliar. The hollow was older than Elkara, older than kings and courts. Some said it had once been the heart of the world before the light rebelled against it. In the deep, Lyra fell. She did not die. The fall broke something open inside her, not her bones but something older. The dark did not close in around her. It made room for her, cradled her, softened the air in her lungs and the shock in her chest. She drifted into sleep, deeper than any dream she had known, and when she woke she was not alone. There were voices in the black. Not loud ones. Not angry or kind. They whispered in curling syllables, never harsh, never clear. Some sounded like wind through thorns. Others like water dropping into deep wells. They spoke through the stone, through the air, through the marrow in her bones. She listened. Years passed above her, unnoticed. Elkara changed its banners. A new prince was born. Old nobles died. Markets shifted. Maps redrew. The hollow remained still. But in its vastness, something began to stir. Lyra walked barefoot, eyes wide. She no longer flinched at shadows. They greeted her like old friends. The darkness lit her path, not with torches but with memory. The stones hummed beneath her steps. Sometimes she would pass ancient glyphs etched in walls older than language. She learned to read them not with her eyes but her breath. Her mark, once the shape of a crescent moon, pulsed like a heartbeat. She was not a child anymore. She didn't age as others did. Not in the hollow. Above, Elkara forgot. Below, Lyra became something else. One day, her fingers brushed a cavern wall and it opened, not with stone grinding but like a breath exhaled. Behind it were bones, hundreds, maybe thousands. They stood in stillness, not decayed but preserved, draped in remnants of velvet and steel. Each one wore a crown, a ring, a crest of the long-forgotten bloodlines. One bore the sun crest of Elkara, etched into its skull. The hollow had a memory of its own. Lyra stepped among them, unafraid. She whispered to them in the dark tongue. Something answered. Not with words but with motion. A wind stirred underground. The bones shifted. The creatures of the dark, the ones that skittered just beyond torchlight, the ones that haunted the edge of myth, began to wake. Pale-eyed serpents uncurled from stone nests. Wingless birds rustled feathers of dust and shadow. A cat with no face watched from a high ledge, unmoving. Spiders of silver thread traced circles on the walls and vanished. They did not bow to her. They did not speak. But they watched, as if waiting. Lyra stood at the center of them all. Her mark burned cold. Above, in the palace gardens, a young prince shivered without knowing why. The stars shone too brightly that night, and the moon refused to rise. The hollow remembered. And the world had forgotten her name. But names can be reclaimed. And something deep in the earth was beginning to rise. The darkness had bones. That was the first thing Lyra understood when she awoke. Somewhere far beneath Elkara, far beneath her old life, her name, her memory of daylight. It was not a place where light had simply failed to reach. It was a place that had never been meant to hold light at all. The air was thick and still. Her breath came slow. Around her, the silence was too perfect, like something held its own breath alongside her. She could not see her hands, her feet, or even the soft shimmer of her crescent mark. She lay in a cradle of moss and stone, undisturbed. But she was not alone. It began with a hum, low and deep, vibrating not in the air but in her chest. Then came a sound like footsteps, but wet and deliberate, as if padded creatures moved with reverence. She did not scream. The fear had already been burned out of her when the court cast her down. What replaced it now was something colder, stillness. Shapes emerged from the dark and for a moment she thought they were ghosts. They glowed faintly, not with flame, but with a dim inner shimmer like dying stars caught beneath their skin. Their forms were humanoid only in the vaguest sense. Too tall, too bent, too many joints. No eyes. Their faces were flat, soft-skinned, and featureless, save for the ridges that pulsed with sound when they moved. They circled her in silence. Lyra sat up slowly. "Are you going to eat me?" she whispered. They tilted their heads. One stepped forward. It didn't speak, not at first. Instead, it raised one long hand and brushed her temple with fingertips cool as damp stone. The moment it touched her she saw, no, felt, something sharp and strange. A memory that was not hers. A field of night-blooming flowers, a war fought without weapons, a girl whose voice turned enemies into mist. A longing so deep it bent space. They fed on memory. Song. Bang. That was how they spoke, by exchanging pieces of self. But they didn't take anything from Lyra. They gave. Not all at once. Slowly. Gently. As though she too was a creature pulled from the dark, not born into a world that feared it. They brought her food, strange roots that pulsed with faint blue light, fungi that sang when chewed. Water seeped from the stone and tasted of copper and wind. When she wandered too far into the tunnels, they guided her back with song lines, melodies that bounced from wall to wall, changing pitch depending on the listener's heartbeat. She came to understand their name for themselves, not a word but a tone. A harmony of loss and longing. When she tried to speak it, it came out as a hum. In return she offered her stories. At first only in her thoughts but soon aloud, half-whispers spoken in Elkari tongue. She told them about the sky, the way it turned violet at the edge of dusk. About horses, bread, fireflies, frost. She told them what it was to be feared as a child. She told them what it meant to be thrown away. They listened. And when she slept they taught her. She dreamed of sight not bound to light, of shadow as vision, of echolocation mapped through breath. She would walk through tunnels and see with sound, feel the pressure of space pressing against her skin, the outlines of caves drawn in her ribs. In her hands bloomed a kind of fire with no flame, no warmth, just a black shimmer that consumed nothing and revealed everything. When she woke, the fire remained. One of the elders, at least she thought of it as elder, showed her how to weave strands of breath into thread and stitch them into walls. Another taught her to shape silence into weapons. A third guided her in calling spirits, old, wordless things that answered only if summoned without light, without voice, without fear. She learned their silence language, a series of pulses through her fingers, her jaw, the soles of her feet. And she changed. Her skin grew paler. Not sickly but reflective, like moonstone. Her hair darkened, then lightened again until it looked dipped in coal ash. Her eyes stopped changing color and settled into something unsettling, entirely black with a hint of blue gleam when she blinked. She could see in pure dark. Hear thoughts not spoken. Feel a lie before it formed. She no longer mourned the sun. The night creatures began to bow when she passed, not out of fear or submission but recognition. She was not their queen, there were no rulers in the hollow, but she had become one of them. Or something between. She asked once in her new silent tongue, "Why didn't you consume me like others?" One of them replied by drawing its hand across her collarbone, where her crescent mark pulsed. Its response was a harmony she could barely interpret, but she felt the words settle behind her ribs. Because you were always ours. Years passed, though she no longer measured them. Sometimes she would find ancient bones in the lower chambers, bones of those cast into the hollow long ago. They had not survived. She mourned them with humming, with echoes, with little pyres of lightless flame. The hollow was a place of ending for most, but not for her. She was not waiting to escape. She had no need to reclaim the surface. She didn't even remember her parents' faces. What mattered now was the rhythm of the caves, the beat of unseen hearts, the slow spin of stone on stone as the world forgot her name and whispered stories of her descent. She was the dark. And she was not alone. The cavern chosen for the vow had no walls. It breathed. Lyra stood at the edge of it, barefoot upon a ledge slick with ancient moss, surrounded by the silent presence of the night creatures. They had no ceremony as surface folk did, no trumpets, no banners, no kneeling crowds. Their ritual was vibration, resonance, shared silence humming with anticipation. The air pulsed like a heartbeat long buried. She had prepared for this. Her body was marked with the patterns of the hollow, not ink but soot and echo layered through song and stillness. Her hair had grown long and pale, trailing behind her like smoke. Her crescent birthmark now shimmered in the darkness, pulsing faintly as though remembering its purpose. She was ready. In her hand she held the cloak, woven not from fabric, but from shadow gathered over years. The night creatures had taught her how to harvest it, from the memory of places that had never known sunlight, from the breath of sleeping beasts, from the corners of forgotten corridors where sound had died. It was stitched with threads of silence and weightless flame, clasped at her throat by a shard of obsidian shaped like a thong. When she draped it over her shoulders it didn't fall, it hovered, clung, curled around her like a second skin. Lyra exhaled and her voice joined the dark. Not the voice she'd spoken with as a child, brittle with fear and stifled rage. This voice was lower now, clear and resonant, carved by years of echo magic and shadow song. She spoke in the ancient tongue, the first tongue, the one the hollow remembered even when the world forgot. "I am the child that fell but did not break," she said, and her voice spread in ripples through the stone. "I am the castaway marked and marred and made." The night creatures bowed their heads, not out of reverence but solidarity. Their silent tones hummed in reply. "I name myself Hollow-born," she said. A wind stirred from below. Not wind exactly. A current. As if the deep had drawn breath. I vow this. I will speak with your voice and carry your silence. I will walk in the world that shunned you. I will not forget. I will be the memory that burns. When she spoke the final phrase, the hollow trembled. The cavern cracked at its edges. Dust fell like snow. A hum so deep it could not be heard, only felt in bone, rose from the base of the chasm. Lyra stood still, eyes closed, arms outstretched. Around her the night creatures knelt. Not in submission. In awe. They knew what she had done. The vow was not symbolic. In the language of the hollow, words were not separate from will. To speak was to bind. To vow was to become. The moment she named herself Hollowborn, her body shifted, subtly. She felt it in the marrow. She had merged herself with the echo of the place. The darkness now recognized her as kin, as herald, as anchor. The air grew heavier. Older. From the lowest reaches of the hollow came a noise Lyra had never heard before. A grinding, ancient groan of something vast stirring for the first time in centuries. The ground beneath her vibrated. The shadows curled toward her, wrapping her tighter in the cloak. The creatures shivered, not in fear but in recognition. Something had awakened. Lyra raised her hands and closed her eyes. The oath had not just echoed, it had been received. And now the hollow had answered. Memories poured into her mind, visions not her own. A forest buried by stone. A city swallowed by a quake. The first being to step into the dark willingly. The last light extinguished by loving hands. Generations of castaways whispering promises into soil. Songs buried in marrow. Names unspoken. All of it surged into her. She staggered but did not fall. Her knees buckled for a breath, then straightened. Her spine arched, her hands flexed, and the shadows coiled around her shoulders like wings. I see you, she whispered to the deep. The response was immediate. A surge of heat, not warmth but potential, rose through the stone. Stalactites hummed. Cracks split open to reveal glimmering roots, threads of ancient power long dormant. Her shadow on the wall twisted into shapes not her own, longer, taller, crowned in thorns of ash. From the mouth of the cave behind her, thousands of glowing eyes blinked open. The night creatures rose and one by one they sang. Not with mouths. With presence. With vibration. A harmony of bone and breath. Their song lifted her. Lyra floated half a hand above the ground, her cloak billowing without wind, her eyes black with pinpricks of starlight. She felt her heartbeat sinking with the pulse of the hollow. Her oath had tied her to this place in ways she couldn't unbind, not that she wanted to. When her feet touched stone again she was changed. She turned, slowly, surveying the creatures who had taken her in, taught her, shaped her. It is time, she said, though the words felt too small. None of them questioned it. The path to the surface was long, but it had always existed. A sealed corridor, a tunnel grown over with centuries of stillness. Lyra walked toward it now, and the stone opened for her, not broken or forced but welcoming. Her oath had awakened something beneath the kingdom. And now she would awaken the world above. It began with something so small no one noticed. A shadow in a garden didn't recede at noon. A mirror in the palace hallway grew fogged though no one had breathed near it. The daisies in the western greenhouse, those that bloomed only under full sun, began to curl inward even as the sky remained clear. Then the light in the royal chapel flickered. It was a chapel built for purity as King Thane called it, a place of white stone, crystal glass and open windows that faced the sunrise. But one morning the altar's candles refused to stay lit, snuffing themselves out one by one no matter how often they were replaced. The priests, used to their rituals running like clockwork, blamed faulty wax, humidity and ill wind. But none of them could explain why the stained glass began to weep at night. Thin trails of condensation slid down holy scenes, dripping onto the marble floor like tears. In the western woods, the farmers said their roosters crowed before midnight. Owls didn't fly and the wolves no longer howled. Instead, they sat in silence at the edge of the forest, staring toward the capital with unmoving eyes. Livestock began to refuse the barns. Chickens roost in trees. Horses screamed when led through archways after dusk. Dogs refused to enter certain doorways at all, bristling and backing away, their hackles stiff as bramble. Inside the castle the changes were more subtle, but more alarming. Servants whispered that shadows weren't holding shape. A column might stretch too long along the floor and not move when the sun did. Once, a scribe swore the shadow of a table detached itself from the table entirely and crept across the room like a living thing. She was dismissed for delirium. The rumor spread anyway. The Queen Israel prided herself on her calm. She had ruled with poise beside King Thane for decades. But her mask began to crack when her youngest daughter, Princess Naevia, was found standing barefoot in the palace gardens at the darkest hour of the night, her white gown soaked in dew, her eyes glassy with sleep. She was speaking a name. Lyra, she murmured again and again. Lyra, Lyra, Lyra. The child was 7 years old. She had never heard that name before. Or so they thought. The physicians were called. Dream fever, they said. A phase. Harmless. The Queen sent them away and locked Naevia's bedroom with 3 different wards. The windows were sealed. The nursemaid was replaced. Still, the girl whispered that name in her sleep, hands curled over her heart. Israel said nothing to the court. She allowed Thane to declare it all seasonal, an odd weather pattern unsettling the realm. She even smiled during the spring parade, walking in sunlight as if her bones weren't cold. But in secret she summoned her old advisors, the ones she had kept hidden since the days of the Hollow. Among them was a man named Theras, a seer who had long since gone blind and mad with the things he'd seen. He had not been allowed in the palace since Lyra's casting. Now, brought in through the servant tunnels at night, he was thin, bent and wild-eyed, his beard a nest of ash gray. They sat him at a table and poured him wine. "What do the shadows say?" the Queen asked him without preamble. Theras did not drink. He placed his hands on the table. They trembled as though the wood burned him. "They say your sins are waking." Israel's jaw tightened. "Be specific." He turned his head slightly toward her, though his ruined eyes could not see. "There is movement in the hollow. Old movement. Something made of echo and dust. A vow has been made. It has weight." The Queen stood. "Impossible. Nothing lives down there." "You were never sure of that," Theras said softly. "You threw the girl in blind. You hoped the hollow would consume her." "Hope had nothing to do with it," she snapped. "She was dangerous. She cracked the chapel mirror by breathing near it. She was a child. And now the hollow remembers her. And she remembers you." The Queen went very still. Theras leaned forward. "You think you erased her? You think you tore her name from the books and burned it from the songs? But names are not always held in ink or fire. Sometimes they are buried in the bones of the land. Sometimes they are written in shadow." Israel's voice was a hiss. "If what you say is true, tell me what must be done." The old seer smiled, but it was a bitter thing. "Nothing. It has already begun." The Queen dismissed him, but his words remained. That night, the palace torches sputtered and smoked. Guards reported strange movements in the lowest corridors. One claimed to see a woman-shaped shadow walk against the torchlight instead of with it. Another swore he heard singing through the stone, no words, just a humming that made the marrow ache. In the highest tower, Princess Naevia woke again. She looked out over the darkened city and placed her hand against the glass. "Lyra's coming home," she said, eyes full of sleep and something else. Something old. And the light flickered once more. The moon bled red. The people of Elkara gathered in courtyards and windows, staring skyward as the eclipse swallowed light. They whispered prayers, spat salt, clutched charms. The royal astrologers called it a rare alignment. An omen, yes, but a harmless one. They insisted it was natural. That the sky simply turned its face as it did every few decades. But deep inside their whitewashed towers they trembled. Because they knew. The timing was too perfect. And beneath the eclipsed moon, far from torchlight, Lyra stepped through her last threshold. The hollow had let her go, not as prisoner but as emissary. She emerged not as the girl once thrown away, nor the child who learned to see without eyes, but as something forged entirely from memory and silence. Her cloak moved as if it were breathing. Her hair trailed behind her like a storm cloud. Her skin shimmered faintly with the bioluminescent trace of the hollow, veins flickering like constellations through shadow. Behind her came the night creatures, shifting in and out of form, part mist, part root, part dream. They were not a marching army. They were a presence, creeping into cracks, into still corners and long-forgotten corridors, whispering back the secrets the city had buried. Lyra did not need gates. She entered the city the way shadows enter a room, quietly, patiently, completely. As the eclipse deepened, shadows across the capital lengthened unnaturally. Candlelight refused to hold shape. Lanterns flickered blue. People swore they saw their own silhouettes detach and walk away. In the grand palace of Elkara, where white marble gleamed even under moonlight, mirrors became dangerous. A chambermaid screamed and dropped a silver tray when she glimpsed a figure in the looking glass, tall, cloaked, with crescent eyes. The reflection did not match her. It watched her. Then it vanished. The first disappearance came before midnight. A guard posted at the southern gate was last seen pacing in his usual circle. An hour later only his helmet remained, upturned, dusted with soot. A second man vanished from the barracks, his bed still warm, the sheets creased with the shape of someone still lying there. In the throne room, chandeliers swayed despite no wind. In the queen's private study, ink turned to smoke inside sealed bottles. The high priest tried to lead a midnight mass. Halfway through the ceremony his voice failed him. He opened his mouth but only ash came out. The queen did not sleep. She sat in her chamber, alone but not alone. Her maids had fled hours ago, clutching rosaries and sobbing. She dismissed them, scorned their cowardice, but she had not replaced them. Her room was locked from within. Still, the shadows lengthened across the walls. Then just before dawn the candles went out. All at once. There was no sound. No footstep. No warning. But when Israel turned, Lyra was there. She did not knock. She did not speak right away. She simply stood beside the queen's bed, her face partially shrouded in that strange shadow cloak. One eye glinted like obsidian. The other glowed faintly with silver. The queen recoiled so fast she struck her shoulder against the headboard. Guards? No one came. Lyra stepped forward. The queen reached for the dagger hidden beneath her pillow, a ceremonial blade of polished sun gold. She raised it. It trembled. Do you remember the dark? Lyra asked, voice soft as breath. Israel choked on a scream. You're dead. You died. Lyra tilted her head. You wished it. You named it so. You fed me to the hollow and wrote me out of your world. But memory has roots. You were a curse, the queen whispered, voice cracking. Your kind always are. Lyra's voice dropped. You feared a child. And in your fear you made a weapon. The blade dropped from Israel's hand. She sank onto her knees, pressing her hands to her eyes as if trying to unsee. I dreamed you were fire, she muttered. I dreamed you were every shadow at once. I am, said Lyra. Israel screamed then, louder than she had as a girl watching Lyra be taken, louder than she had when her daughter first said the forbidden name in her sleep. She screamed until her voice went hoarse, until the sound scraped from her throat like sand. No one heard her. Not because they weren't listening, but because the sound had no place to travel. Lyra had folded the space around them in silence. A trick she had learned from the hollow, to isolate a scream so thoroughly it became a secret. The queen screamed for days. No one saw her. No one found her. Her bed remained untouched, her windows unbroken. But her mirror was cracked clean through, one long line from top to bottom. In the crack some claimed to see movement. A hand pressed to glass. A sliver of cloth. A glint of a birthmark like a black crescent. By the week's end, Israel was declared vanished. Her crown was placed in the hall of mourning. The eclipse passed. The sun returned. But the shadows remained just a little too long. King Thane stood atop the alabaster balcony, the white fire of the sanctified pyres rising behind him, his arms outstretched as though he could summon purity from air alone. Elkara must be cleansed, he thundered, voice trembling only slightly. By light, by flame we drive out the rot that crawls from the hollow. There will be no return. No resurrection. No dark queen among us. His words echoed through the square. Crowds filled every tier and step, every alley mouth and rooftop. Torches flickered in thousands of hands. Yet even as the blaze behind the king roared, the people did not cheer. They watched. They had seen the signs. They had felt their dreams twist and change. Had found soot in their cradles. Had heard forgotten names in the mouths of sleepwalkers. Most had not spoken it aloud, but now the king demanded loyalty, not just of the tongue but of belief. He forced them to chant with him, to speak prayers to light, even as the darkness within the walls whispered that light had failed long ago. Thane's priests, clad in sun-gold robes and circlets of flame weed, began the rites. The fires were supposed to leap from the temple hearths, dancing down the streets, devouring any trace of the dark. But the flames did not rise. They stuttered, dwindled, then stopped altogether. The smoke from the pyres curled downward instead of up. Candles flickered sideways. In the brazier at the king's feet, the oil hissed, then turned black as though something ancient had exhaled through it. A murmur spread through the crowd. One priest tried to relight the central flame with a torch from the temple altar. The moment he lowered it, the torch died in his hand, the fire extinguished not by wind or water, but by something colder and older than either. And then she came. No fanfare announced her arrival. No gate opened. No trumpet or scream. One moment the square was full of waiting breath. The next, the shadows deepened, and Lyra stepped through them as easily as smoke. She walked between guards who didn't see her until she passed. The torches dimmed as she moved, but not into darkness. They dimmed into clarity, into something more real than fire. Her cloak trailed behind her like ink in water, absorbing the torchlight, bending the flame's shape as though shaming it. Her body shimmered faintly with a starless glow. It was not light in the way people knew it, not the warmth of sun or the sting of torch, but the memory of light as imagined in dreams. The kind that burns behind the eyelids in the deepest moments of silence. The kind that lives in the hollow. She stood before the king. Gasps rippled like broken glass through the crowd. Some recognized her. Others only sensed her. But all eyes fixed on her now. Thane raised his sword. This is a deception. A trick of shadow. You will burn, witch. He thrust the blade toward her chest. It halted an inch away, trembling midair. Lyra looked at the blade. It crumbled into ash. The king stumbled back, his mouth open. This is heresy. Lyra did not speak to him. She turned to the people. She saw their faces. Wide-eyed, pale, trembling. And she saw the flickers beneath, guilt like marrow rot. The memory of how they'd let her be taken. The silence of bystanders who'd looked away as a child was led down the steps to the hollow. How they believed the story told afterward. The story of a dangerous girl. Of necessary sacrifice. She looked at them with eyes like twin eclipses, reflecting not their faces but their choices. No accusations. No shouts. Only silence. And into that silence the night responded. The shadows lengthened across the square. Not threatening. Not angry. Just present. Attentive. The night itself bowed. The torches bent sideways, their flames dipping toward her. Windows dimmed. The wind stopped. Time or something like it stilled. Lyra raised her hands, palms outward. And the flames returned. But they were no longer gold. They were black and silver, cold and beautiful, wreathing her body in a soft, flickering crown. The hollow's fire, not consuming but revealing. In that moment the people saw her not as a monster, not as a queen, not even as a woman, but as a mirror. A reckoning. The truth. She had returned not with an army, not with vengeance. She had returned with her presence. With the proof that what was buried does not vanish. That what is silenced does not forget. And that light without memory cannot save. Thane collapsed to his knees. No blade fell. No voice shouted the final blow. The king bowed his head, trembling. And Lyra, cloak trailing behind her like spilled ink, walked past him. Toward the palace. The people parted to let her pass. No one dared to stop her. They could only watch as she climbed the marble steps of the place that once banished her, the fire of the hollow flickering gently at her shoulders. Behind her the shadows followed. The palace of El-Kara stood draped in silence. Not the gentle silence of nightfall, nor the noble hush of reverence, but a deeper, older silence. A silence so profound it made the marble groan beneath its own weight. The sun had set hours ago, but its light had not returned. Lanterns were lit and relit, only to dim and gutter out as if shamed by the presence that now claimed the capital. Lyra stood at the threshold of the great gates. Her cloak of shadow trailed behind her like the long tongue of a thundercloud. Around her moved the night creatures, not in formation, not in rank, but as shadows with thought and intention. Some walked upright, tall as towers, their limbs fluid and glistening like oil. Others crawled or floated or melted through cracks in the walls. None of them spoke. They did not need to. Their presence alone changed the air, made it dense with memory. Within the walls of the palace, the nobility huddled in silk-lined chambers. They had been raised to believe fear was for the peasantry, that bloodlines guaranteed safety. But now even the ancient banners seemed to shiver on the walls. The chandeliers swayed despite still air. The hearths smoked upward into nothingness. Servants whispered of moving shapes, of footprints appearing in dust where none had walked. The nobles had barricaded themselves. Some gathered in the high council hall, lit dozens of candles and wrapped themselves in golden robes. They prayed to their ancestors. To light. To reason. But no prayer could reach beyond the palace walls now. What walked outside was older than their gods and more intimate than their guilt. Lyra did not speak as she crossed the palace threshold. She did not need to. The darkness remembered. The shadows inside thickened as if to greet her. The doors did not resist. Wood and iron had no loyalty to blood. As she entered, the walls of the grand hallway began to breathe. Not physically but in feeling. The air pulsed. The chandeliers dimmed to barely visible rings. Murals painted in praise of royal triumph seemed to buckle, their colors desaturating until all was washed in grayscale and echo. In the throne room, nobles turned to run, but found their feet rooted. Not by force. By memory. One by one, the night creatures entered behind her. They said nothing. They simply existed, and in doing so made the truth bloom. The eldest duke, a man who had never dirted his fingers yet signed the orders for dozens to be thrown into the hollow, fell to his knees. His mouth opened, to beg, to scream, but the hollow silenced speech. Instead he began to hear it. The voices. Not of Lyra. Of those who came before. The girl who wept for her sister as she was pulled away. The mother who gave her last breath shielding her child during the long fall. The old man who sang lullabies to keep others sane in the dark, until his own voice crumbled. The voices wrapped around the duke like a storm, not shouting, not blaming, just existing. He covered his ears. It made no difference. His scream joined the others, useless, high-pitched, and irrelevant. Lyra did not touch him. She did not pass judgment. The darkness did it for her. Another noble, a lady who'd once organized a celebration the very day 100 were sentenced to the hollow, now felt the wine on her lips turn to ash. The perfume in her hair choked her. The diamonds at her throat tightened like noose chains. She saw the faces, each one reflected in the jewels she had polished to brilliance. "Please," she whispered. It was never personal. But the darkness did not care for excuses. The night creatures encircled the throne. They did not destroy it. They did not desecrate it. They simply looked at it until it withered, would split down the center. Velvet peeled and flaked like dead skin. The symbols of rule, lion, sun, crown, melted from the stone base like ice under breath. There was no throne now, just memory. And the memory was not kind. Lyra stood before the dais and turned. All eyes were on her. Some stared in terror. Some in awe. Some in a strange and aching recognition. And behind the gathered nobility, stretching far into the city, were the common people. The ones who had watched her taken, who had been told not to speak her name, who had dreamed of her but dared not remember. They stood now at the gates, in the streets, on rooftops. Silent. Waiting. Lyra raised a single hand. She said, not with her voice but with her presence, "You will see." And one by one the nobles saw. They relived not just what they had done, but what they had ignored. They saw the hollow as it truly was, not a pit, not a punishment, but a vault of memory. The realm beneath the realm. What they called dark was simply what they refused to understand. And what they feared had always been truth itself. Their cries echoed through the palace. Through the city. No one answered. Some nobles fled, only to find themselves running in circles. Others wept. A few knelt, not in worship but in collapse. The oldest among them withered into dust, their names curling off their skin like smoke. Lyra moved past each one not as judge but as witness. The night creatures trailed behind her. Not harming. Not touching. Only watching. Because they were witnesses too. They had seen the world's underside. Had fed on pain and song and silence. Had held Lyra when the darkness first claimed her. Had sung to her. Had lifted her. And now they bore witness to the justice she never asked for but always deserved. At the center of the throne room, Lyra raised her hands once more. This time she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but no one could mistake its shape. There will be no new king. No more crown. No throne carved from the bones of the forgotten. She stepped onto the platform where the throne had once stood. The hollow remembers what the light rejected. And now the world will remember too. The palace groaned. Not with collapse. With release. Windows shattered, not from force but from the sheer pressure of memory. Curtains disintegrated into smoke. The golden threads in the carpet turned black. And in the streets people dropped to their knees. Not from fear. But from understanding. They saw the night creatures and did not run. They looked into Lyra's eyes and did not look away. They felt the presence of those forgotten, not as ghosts but as roots, and knew something sacred had been returned. Lyra stepped down from the dais. Her cloak swirled behind her. As she passed the nobles, many now wordless, broken or still, she whispered one final truth. You sent us into the hollow so you could forget. But memory lives in silence. And now silence has spoken. The night creatures followed her into the courtyard. The stars above blinked, one by one, back into view. Not bright. Not triumphant. Just there. Lyra looked once more at the palace. The doors were open now. No guards. No banners. Just wind and ash and the weight of truth. And then she walked on, past the palace gates into the city. Not to rule it. Not to claim it. but to remind it that darkness remembers, that no one is truly cast away, and that some names, though buried, are never lost. Lyra left the city in silence, the way only one who had never truly belonged to it could. No fanfare. No procession. The people watched from behind shuttered windows and quiet doorways, their eyes wide not with fear, but with something closer to reverence, though none dared speak it aloud. Her cloak no longer shimmered with movement. It trailed behind her like twilight made tangible, like the space between breaths at dusk. She did not turn back. Behind her, the palace stood hollow, stripped of its thrones, its banners, its certainty. The weight of centuries had cracked in a single night, and what remained was not ruin but revelation. The hollow remained open now. No longer sealed, no longer whispered about as curse or myth. The mouth of the chasm yawned at the edge of the capital like a wound too deep to close. But it did not frighten people as it once had. Instead, the lost and the quiet, the strange and the dreaming began to come. Pilgrims they were called, not in robes or rituals but in grief and memory. Some came to mourn, others to listen, and some, unknowingly, came to be remade. Children born under eclipses were no longer feared, no longer sent away in secret or left to vanish beneath stone. Instead, their names were whispered into the wind with hope. They were called dusk-born, hollow-touched, dark-blessed. They learned to see without eyes, to speak truths no court had language for. These children did not chase power. They chased what had been forgotten. And the hollow answered. The sun still rose but it no longer ruled. The court no longer sat. The world turned, slow, soft, unburdened. It was not an age of triumph, nor peace, nor greatness. It was something quieter, something more enduring. They called it the Age of Dusk. And those who walked its paths walked with memory at their heels. Not all understood it. Not all accepted it. But no one denied that something had changed, that the world now carried its shadow like a second skin, no longer ashamed. At the edge of the hollow, where moss grew thick and the wind murmured lullabies, a story was carved in black stone by hands that remembered. The final line read, "They left her in the dark to die, but the dark had been waiting for her.